All right, hey, guys, we're starting a new book. It's
Yay.
Exodus, and it's more than just a Bob Marley song. And it's a great song, though.
It is.
But Exodus is one of those books that is at the front end really exciting, and then as it goes to the back end, you can get a little lost. Like, why are we talking about all these laws and the tabernacle and all this different stuff? And one of the key things to remember is that the Pentateuch is telling us this big story about how God created everything, and then it zooms down to one family with Abraham, and then zooms back out to the nation, and how through the nations, or through Israel, the nations are a blessing to the world. And so Exodus is telling us this big, huge story. And the focus here is on the formation of the community. And the central things that the community needs to remember is God's saving work, but then also remembering how God focuses the community in on the temple or the tabernacle as the hub for how people are going to interact with the Lord. And so the last few chapters of Exodus really are going to be focusing in on that tabernacle, and it's going to feel redundant, but it's important for the people to know God's expectations and his roles there. And so in Exodus, we see great displays of God's power, which is something so far in creation and in the judgment on the judgment of the flood and Babel, and even with the exile for the Adam and Eve as they get kicked out of the garden. There's like displays of God's power happening in the book of Genesis, but this is where we really start to see God's miracle working on behalf of the people of Israel, which is going to be a major part of the narrative moving forward. So I have some things, some major themes to hold on to. And then I also sent out a couple of links this afternoon with just an overview Sunday school guide, basically, for how Exodus is broken down. And then those two Bible project videos, which are always, their videos are always great. And so if you haven't had a chance to watch those, I highly recommend those as well. But some of the key themes in the book of Exodus are the God who controls history. And so we're going to see how he orchestrates events to bring about the fulfillment of his designs for the nation of Israel. And so that's a major piece that is continuing to be developed in Exodus. We also see the theme of God's name. If we're introduced officially to God's name as Yahweh, I am that I am. And so we have seen, if we were reading through the Hebrew text in Genesis, we would have seen Yahweh referred to, but this is where the first time where we actually see God introducing himself to Moses, and we'll look at that passage tonight. And the divine name is an important part, even though there's some debate over what I am that I am really means. How do we translate that? But one of the things to note as you're reading your English Bibles, if you see the Lord, and Lord is all capitalized, that is a clue to us as English readers that the text is not just talking about like the Sir, like how we might think of as Lord, but as God, like Yahweh's divine name, the Lord. Because there are going to be other times in the Bible where we'll see Lord, which is in Hebrew is Adonai. And so we'll see Lord, but it's not referring to God. It could just be somebody talking to like a servant talking to their master would say, my Lord. And so making those things clear. And then there's also some debate over how we actually pronounce the divine name, because in Hebrew, we don't, the Hebrew text that we have, it has the 4 letters, which we would call YHWH. And so it has those 4 letters, and then Hebrew is a consonant-based language, and then there's these dots that would serve as the vowels. And so in our Hebrew text that we have, the vowels are actually the same vowels that they would use for Adonai. And so that was a clue to the readers of the text to not speak the divine name, going to the commandment to not use the Lord's name in vain. And so they would say Hashem, the name, or they would say Adonai instead of actually saying Yahweh. Or one of the other ways that people have been pronouncing it for hundreds and hundreds of years is Jehovah. And so Jehovah and Yahweh, those are the two kind of debates, like which is it? And we don't really know for sure. And both are okay. You'd be fine using either one. But just for your understanding, like I'm going to go with Yahweh. Just the school that I went to, that's how they pronounced it, and so that's how I was trained, and so that's what I'm going to hold on to. So we also see another theme in Exodus is that it is the book of the God who remembers. He remembers his covenant with Abraham and the patriarchs, and that leads to his responding to the people of Israel as they cry out to him, and which leads to the God who acts in salvation. The different idols and lowercase g gods of the Canaanite peoples and even Pharaoh and Egypt, like they do not have the power to save. And that is one of the major contrasts that Exodus is setting up for us today and for the people of Israel, is that God has the power to save people. And so he works for salvation. But we also will see the God who acts in judgment. And so he brings judgment against Pharaoh and Egypt. But later in the book, we'll also see that he will bring judgment against his own people for their disobedience. As Moses goes up onto Mount Sinai, he's up there for 40 days, and the people, while he's up on the temple or up on the mountain getting the design for the tabernacle, Aaron, his brother and the priest of the people, he is actually leading them in idol worship down below as they make the golden calf, and that leads to judgment. And so God's judgment is on the nations like Egypt, but also God's judgment will be expressed to his own people as they act into disobedience. And then we also have the God who speaks is a major theme. So God will speak to Moses. God will speak through Moses, but we're also going to see in the book that God will speak to the people. And at the Sinai event, God speaks directly to the people of Israel from the mountain, and then they send Moses up on their behalf. And so that's another major theme, is God who speaks. So we see in the book that God is creating a family with Israel. And one of the key elements of this family is that Israel is God's son. And later on in the scriptures, we'll see that the Lord talks about bringing his son out of Egypt. And when that is first mentioned, that is really about Israel coming out of Egypt. But then we also see that same verse applied to Jesus as the Son of God. And Jesus' own story parallels the story of the nation of Israel as well. And so he brings him out of Egypt. He sends him to Egypt, brings him out of Egypt. So those are some of the themes. And so part of the organization of the book, if you can look at it as three major parts. So you have Israel in Egypt, verses chapters 1 through halfway through 13, and then Israel at Sinai, so that's 13:17 through 24:11, and Israel around the tabernacle, which is 24:12 through the rest of the book. So those are the three major acts of the book of Exodus. So Egypt, Sinai, tabernacle, and so preparation around how to worship the Lord rightly. So there are a bunch of other ways that you potentially could divide up the book of Exodus, but those are some of the just three major chunks to be looking at. And so we're going to, like I said, we're going to have some law talk later. We're going to have tabernacle talk, and there's going to be some times where we're just like, are we really talking about the measurements of these things? And the specificity of those commands in the building of the tabernacle. I believe that is important for us, not just to like have the Bible trivia, but just to recognize that God cares about these things. But then there's also going to be some elements of the tabernacle where we have some specificity and then some non-specificity. Like there are some measurements that we don't have when we have so many others. That is like, why wouldn't we have the height of this when we have the width of it? But that'll all come in time. But it starts with the names, and that's actually the Hebrew name for Exodus. Hebrew books in the Old Testament, the names are the first words of the book, and so the Hebrew name for Exodus is "These are the names of." So that's just a fun little fact. And then we get Exodus because Exodus means the way out. And so X is out and Odos is road. So the way out in Greek. And so that's the Greek word that we get Exodus from. So that is kind of a setup for where we're going with the book. So let's just jump in to chapter 1. And we're going to go through chapter 3 tonight. And if we are running long, I might cut it off a little early. So, or if we might not go all the way through 3. So, yeah. All right, let's jump in. Exodus 1, verse 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. All right, so these are the names. The purpose here for giving this generation again is to tie this book back to Genesis. And if we remember, like Moses is the writer of most of the Pentateuch. We can say that with pretty good confidence. And so he is, Genesis is one huge scroll. And so Exodus would be the next scroll. And so the like design pattern, intentionality to say, remember the people we just read about in Genesis. This is the continuation of that very same story. And there's some interesting things going on here with the way that this book starts that echoes back to Genesis. So God's command to the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, is be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And here we see, as they're talking about the people of Israel in Egypt, they were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied, increased in number, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. And then we also see this interesting comparison to Pharaoh. He says to the people of Egypt, we must deal shrewdly with the people of Israel. And if you remember the serpent was the shrewdest of the animals in the garden. And so there are some echoes back into the Old Testament, into Genesis that are helpful for us as we are reading this and we're remembering, oh yeah, these are words that we have heard before, and they are clues to us, like with the Pharaoh being shrewd, it's a clue to us that this is probably not the hero of the story. If the serpent was shrewd, then we see here that the Pharaoh is also going to be a problem to us. Another part of this is talking about this Pharaoh who, to whom Joseph meant nothing. And it's been about 400 years that Joseph was in Egypt, and he set up the whole system to protect the people of Egypt from the famine. And all the nations of the world were coming to Egypt to buy grain, and Jacob's family came down to Egypt as well, and Joseph protected them, gave them the best land. And so they continued to grow and grow and grow. Now this new dynasty has come, this new king, Pharaoh, who doesn't remember all the goodness of Joseph for the people and the people of Israel. And so it probably wasn't a direct line of all of the pharaohs throughout history, like coming to this point. There's probably dynasties that a dynasty that rose up, overthrew the other dynasty, and so then they don't hold the same cultural history as the people of as the previous dynasty. So the Israelites are really just a problem now that needs to be solved for the current dynasty. And so he is telling them that we must deal shrewdly with them. And so they develop a plan to enslave them ultimately. And so here are these people the people of Israel, who are numerous, they're powerful, they're influential, and we don't really know how. This is one of the questions that I have. How did these Israelites become enslaved? Like, did they volunteer? I mean, nobody volunteers to be a slave like in this way, but like somehow they became enslaved. And so that's where we pick up in verse 11. They put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar, and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So somehow they oppressed them. They gave them these terrible, terrible jobs. Brickmaking in the ancient world was filthy, and it was gross, and it took a tremendous amount of work to do that. And this is happening at the time where Egypt is growing in its building projects. And I one of the great blessings in the last several years is I have actually been able to go to Egypt, and it was awesome. It was crazy to go to a place where these stories happened, and to go and on a boat on the Nile River and think like, this is the river that God eventually he turns to blood in the book of Exodus. And there's a lot of things that like kind of come alive there. One of the most interesting things is when I went to go to the Sphinx, which is an amazing feat that and the fact that it still exists is really cool. But you can look at the Sphinx and you see the craftsmanship, and then turn around, across the street is a Pizza Hut. And so there's a contrast of culture happening in Egypt even now. But the things like the pyramids, like these are tremendous building projects. And the Egyptian tour guide that we went on the bus with was talking about the pyramids. And he said that the pyramids were actually built by the farmers during the off season, which made me laugh, because that doesn't seem like something farmers would do. First of all, it's like, yeah, I'm going to go and do this terrible work, and so yeah. So this idea of slaves building the marvels of Egypt is something that Egyptian folks don't really want to talk about. But here we have this example, like these two cities, the Israelites built them, and so yeah, so they are trying to oppress them, but while they're oppressing them, the Israelites continue to flourish, and they have even more kids, which is, one of the interesting themes throughout the Bible and throughout the history of the church. Even is when there are seasons of oppression or persecution, God's people flourish, and which is a comfort. As a pastor, you want things to not be hard for your people, but also like recognizing that in those hardships, God can do really wonderful things. He can continue to increase his community, but we don't go running after hardship and persecution, but we don't have to fear persecution, because we are not our own. We are bought with a price, and we are the people of God. So their first plan is to enslave them. The Egyptians, our first plan is to enslave the Israelites. It doesn't really work. So let's keep going. Verse 15. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." So this is, again, like another attempt to eliminate the people of Israel. And Pharaoh starts with the birth of baby boys, because the baby boys are going to most likely be the way that the people are going to hold on to their identity as a nation, because boys will carry on the family name, and that kind of inheritance practicality. Whereas letting the girls live, these girls would become roped into the Egyptian men's lives, and the families would be dramatically transformed in that way. And so here we have these two midwives who are Hebrew women, who were probably like official midwives or leading midwives, who were, there had to have been many, many more midwives than just these two, but they were, examples of great heroism. And how they did this, we're not totally sure how they saved all these women from having to have their baby boys killed. But they say, like, Hebrew women are just way faster at giving birth than Egyptian women, and like we can't get there in time. And could it have been that these Hebrew women knew that if the midwife got there in time, then they would have to kill them, and so they just didn't call the midwives until they absolutely had to? Um, some commentaries even argued that the the midwives just intentionally would not go there. Some people do think there is a genetic difference between the way that Israelites and Egyptians gave birth, but part of the culture, though, like, we see this picture of these birthing stools, which I don't understand how that works, but the Egyptian culture could have been like the midwife is called right away, like as soon as labor starts, come, and the midwife does most of the work. Whereas in the Hebrew culture, the midwife is there just at the end. There's a lot of like unknowns, but what we get here is that they are working to preserve the life of these boys. And so we see a blessing from the Lord is that they ended up having families of their own, which we don't really, there's some confusion about, did these midwives just not generally have kids? How does that work? But pointing it out that the Lord gave them families of their own, like that is a blessing as they are trusting the Lord. And so the midwife plan didn't work. And so then Pharaoh gives the orders to all his people: throw the boys in the Nile. And one of the thoughts behind why you would do that is the Nile was believed to be divine in its own way. And so by saying, let's just throw the boys in the Nile, they're really saying, like, we're going to let the gods determine what to do with these boys. We don't want to be murderers. Like, we're not monsters. So let's just throw these boys in the Nile and then let let our gods decide what to do with them. And so that's the next phase. And so the atrocity of this whole chapter 1 of Exodus is intense. Like, they're trying to kill the people of Israel. And we don't know how many of these boys did get thrown into the Nile, but we are told a story about one who was preserved. And so chapter 2 starts with introducing us to Moses's family. 2:1. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." We're introduced to Noah in the midst of this season of persecution for the people of Israel. And there's some interesting notes in the first couple of verses. Is the family has the baby and they need to keep him quiet and protect him. Nowhere in here are we given a name for this baby, for this boy. Like Moses's parents, didn't name him, which is unusual. So far, when we've seen baby boys named, we get their names right away. But here, they didn't give him a name. And Moses is the youngest of 3 siblings that we know about. He has an older brother named Aaron and his sister here, who is Miriam. And they're going to be major figures in the history of the people of Israel in the future, for our history of the people of Israel. And so they have 2 kids already. And now here is a third who is a fine child. And the mother, when she can't hide him any longer, puts him in a basket. And this basket is the same word that we use for Noah's Ark. It's a little boat that she uses to put him on the Nile and not throw him into the Nile like Pharaoh commands the people, but to put him on the Nile and trust God to do something. And for Miriam to follow along, this is a pretty intense experience for a young girl. She's probably less than 12 years old, and she's watching her baby brother down the river, hiding on the bank. And the miracle of miracles is that Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe, and the baby's crying, and she goes and rescues him. And Miriam is so resourceful. I love this. She's like, "Oh, hey, I see you found a baby. Would you like me to help you with that? This is a Hebrew baby. I know maybe some midwife, or not midwives, but like a wet nurse who can help you raise this baby." And how does she know this potential wet nurse? Because it's the baby's mother. So here God is doing something very interesting in how he's bringing about Moses onto the scene and protecting him and protecting his family, because Pharaoh's daughter agrees to everything Miriam suggests and then pays Moses's mother to raise her own child, which is pretty awesome, pretty good deal. And so for years, they were in the house. Like Moses was raised by his mother before he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And that's going to be important because he knows that he is a part of this, the Hebrew people. His mother would have told him, would have explained to him that, and even told him the stories of God's saving work for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so these are names and stories that he would have heard from his mother. But then he goes into Egypt and is raised by Pharaoh, which is it would have been a great education, teaching him languages and how to write and read, military strategy, diplomacy, all of these different things Moses would have learned. And if we look at the trajectory of Moses's life, the first third of it really is in the formative stages, going from ages 0 to 40, and a lot of that is spent in Pharaoh's house. And so as we are looking through all of these different things, after he goes back to back to Pharaoh's mother, or Pharaoh's daughter, then he gets the name Moses, in the way the narrative spells it out. And it means essentially to be born. So he's born of the water, to be drawn out of the water in that way. So, yeah. And so here, then the story jumps 40 years in the future is the best estimate. So verse 11. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them and their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day, he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. So somehow Moses knows the Hebrews are his people, and he knows the privilege that he has been given to be raised by Pharaoh in Egyptian education, Egyptian power, all of these different things. So he has this position of privilege, and he sees that the taskmaster is attacking and beating the Egyptian slave, so he kills him. And there are some things that we are told that hiding a body in Egypt would be difficult because he just buries them in sand. Whereas, in the land of Israel, it's a lot rockier, more like traditional dirt. There might be easier places to hide bodies. Several commentaries made that note. And so he hides the body thinking he's gotten away with something. But then the Hebrews who fight amongst themselves point out, hey, we know you killed a guy, so what's your deal? So he runs away to the land of Midian, which is kind of an undetermined place. The Midianites were nomads, but it would have been just, to the northeast from Egypt into the Sinai Peninsula, most likely. That's where we're going to see the Mount Sinai is going to be in that region. And so, so he's on the run and he's like, my life is over. I don't know what I'm going to do. Sits down by a well. Wells are important. A lot of interesting things happen by wells. We saw several important wells in Abraham and Isaac's lives, even in the life of Jesus. John chapter 4, he sits down by a well and talks with the Samaritan woman. Wells are gathering places. They're important cultural hubs for the people. It's kind of like, even like a coffee shop today where all kinds of people are going to be there. And, in the future, when we can sit in places again and enjoy coffee together, like that's one of those cultural touchstone places that everybody goes. So he sits down by this well and his life seems to be over. So verse 16, now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, why have you returned so early today? They answered, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. And where is he? Reuel asked his daughters. Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So we have this scene where the priest of Midian, Reuel, doesn't have any sons. That's why the daughters are the shepherdesses. This would not be something that daughters would normally do. And so the daughters are coming to the well. In the previous book, we saw that wells were often covered with a large stone because they wanted to protect it from people who might try to poison the well. And so here, like that could be a similar situation where Moses is by the well. And so the shepherdesses are being harassed by these other shepherds from a different family, drives them away. And maybe he uncovered the stone and then he started to give them all the water. And that's a ton of work to do to get to draw all the water and give enough for the flock. And Moses does it all for them. And Reuel is amazed by his generosity, his kindness, and invites him into his family. I have a sneeze coming. I'm sorry if it happens. One of the things that we should note here is Reuel is one of the names that we get for Moses' father-in-law in the text. We will also see Jethro will be something that he will be called an Hobab. And so these different names, there are some theories for what these names could be. Reuel could be a family name. Jethro could be an uncle's name. Like there's some different things that could be happening and it could all just be one person with 3 names. It's a possibility as well. So we first meet him as Reuel, and his name means friend of God. And so he's a priest of Midian, which is not the elect people of this story so far, but he is a friend of God. And when we will see him later on in the narrative, he will convert. It seems he converts to become a part of the community of God. um, in the ways of Israel, and he will give Moses some advice on how to be a good leader. So he brings Moses into his family. He marries off Zipporah to Moses. They have a kid. Like everything is moving along in an encouraging way. And even his name, Moses' name, Gershom, means son of uh, or alien there. It just means like I'm a foreigner. This is my place. I'm a foreigner. And so Moses is identifying his life in his son's life. But something happens in verse 23. The king of Egypt died. The people of Israel are crying out to the Lord, and God hears, and he remembers, and he starts stirring something up for the people of Israel. So, what is he going to do? How is he going to stir this up? He starts that journey in chapter 3. And yeah, let's go. Let's just go for it. All right, chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro. There's Jethro, right? Ruel. Here's Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, Horeb and Mount Sinai, those are interchangeable names. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Okay, so Moses is doing the life of the shepherd. Like he's just out there, and he will spend 40 years essentially in exile in Midian and shepherding Jethro's flocks. As we think about the life of a shepherd, there's a lot of loneliness, a lot of time away. But he would have been very familiar with the land. And so he's up on this mountain and all of a sudden seeing this fiery bush that's not burning. Like that's unusual. And so he would have, it makes sense that he'd be like, well, I should go check that out. And we are told here that the angel of the Lord, and that's literally translated messenger of Yahweh, was in this bush. And when we see the angel of the Lord in the Bible, one of the things that we should keep in mind is sometimes it is an angel, a messenger. Sometimes it is a theophany, an appearance of God. And the way this text it reads is like that's what's happening here. The messenger of the Lord, the angel of the Lord, is actually the presence of God and speaking God's words to Moses. And as he is talking, he calls Moses over, and Moses comes, and then he says, tells him to not come too close. It's not because he doesn't want to talk to him. It's because Moses is not fully aware of where he is. It's like he does not recognize the holiness of this moment. So he takes his shoes off, which is something that priests uh, would do in Egypt, to take the sandals off because it is holy ground. And so he tells him to take the shoes off. Moses would have recognized through his training that this is a holy ground moment. And then he says, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God that your mom told you about when she was raising you, like in the family stories, like this, I am that God. And so he goes on to say, like, this is my plan. I've heard of the people crying out, and I have come down to rescue them. The coming down of the Lord is a significant moment. Like he hears enough, and he comes, and he is among his people. We will in John chapter 1, the Word becomes flesh and dwelled among us. He tabernacled among us. One of the key things that we see in Exodus is God wants to have a place with his people. And so this is the first we see that God is coming down to be with them. And Moses is overwhelmed when he recognizes who he's talking to, and he lays his face in the dirt, basically, like, I am not worthy of being anywhere with you. Like, you are so holy and I'm so not. But God starts revealing the plan. Like, I'm going to bring the people out, and I'm going to give them the land of the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, the Hittites. I'm going to give the land to the people, just like I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses' response is, who am I that I should do this? And the Lord tells him, like, look, you will know for sure that I'm calling you to do this, because when it happens, you're going to come back here and you're going to worship me with all of the people of Israel. So, Moses is doubtful, and we're going to see more of this doubtfulness from Moses in the next couple of chapters, as he's talking with God and trying to figure out who he is and how he fits into God's divine plan. But let's keep going in verse 13. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites. So he's not committing to anything. Suppose I do what you tell me to do, and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Go, assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. All right, so we get this revelation of the divine name, and names signify power. The phrasing here, I am who I am, in Hebrew is Ayeh Asher Ayeh. I will be what I will be. I guess truncated down to Yahweh. It's the shortening of that phrase. And this, the name here should be understood as referring to Yahweh's being the creator, the sustainer, his power, all that exists, both creation and history, and also reminding us that he's active. I am that I am. I will be what I will be. And he ties his name to the history of the people of Israel. Just they know who I am, and remind them the stories, remind them of what God has done, and help them to trust the Lord together. And so he tells Moses, go to the elders and tell them, like, the Lord has sent me, and the elders will all agree together, and then you will all go to the Pharaoh and say, we want to take a 3-day journey. And one of the interesting things is that this 3-day journey is kind of an idiom to say, we want to just go out for an undetermined period of time to be to go and worship the Lord. And so when we see Pharaoh's resistance to the idea of a 3-day journey to go and offer the Lord a sacrifice, Pharaoh knows that the 3-day journey is not really a 3-day journey. And he understands, like, this is going to be you trying to leave. And if you leave, then I lose all my workforce. And God is telling Moses, all of this is what's going to happen, but God will then intervene with all the wonders of his power. And, it is, we'll see how God uses the plagues, the 10 plagues, to get Pharaoh's attention and to transform the people of Egypt. But as you continue through here, God is telling him all of these things that are going to happen. And like, he's going to say, like, all the wonders that are going to happen will actually lead the people of Egypt to, like, be on your side in a way that they will bless you as you go. So there's this concept of plundering the people of Egypt. So it started with Moses's mom being paid by Pharaoh to raise this kid that should have been just thrown into the river. That was the first element of plundering Egypt in the book here. But then we see here God is promising, like, when you leave, you'll just be able to ask the women, and they will give you things of value. And like God is saying, I'm going to do this for you. So it's not just that God is going to overthrow the nation by power, because he can, but he's also going to transform the hearts of the common people of Egypt to bless the people with these gifts as they go. So let's stop there, and then we'll pick up in chapter 4 next week. But do y'all have any questions? Covered a lot of ground tonight. So if you have any questions, I'd love to hear those and take some time to respond or clarify on anything that we talked about. So, thoughts? It was a lot. So. All right. Well, cool. Nailed it. First 3 chapters, no questions.
I guess it's an easier read than Genesis.
Well, yeah. I mean, some of these stories
so far.
Yeah, this is a story that, like, we've been told a bunch of times.
Yeah.
If you've grown up in church, like, this is something that you hear pretty regular. Whereas, like, not a lot of sermons on the Tower of Babel, not a lot of sermons on Judah and Tamar. There's a lot of stuff in Genesis where it's like, let's just skip that. But here we're seeing, like, no, these are the stories that's like, yeah, look how awesome God is. In the midst of all the crazy and the brokenness, God does some really cool stuff in the book of Exodus. And here in the beginning,
even Hollywood has tackled these ones, so several times.
Yeah, and some very well, and others less well.
Not
so
so much.
one of my questions that I never really understood is why does ABC play the 10 Commandments at Easter? I know like Passover is a part of the whole thing, but it's like Easter is more than Passover. So on Easter Sunday, that's after Passover. Anyway, it just bothers me. Play an Easter movie. So
Which Easter movie?
Yeah.
which Easter movie? I don't know. Just play a Jesus movie, even like King of Kings. Like it's not the
The
best.
robe.
The robe is really good.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur is closer to
Yes.
to the Easter story, and like it's not overtly religious. So I don't know.
I did, you know what, Jason, I did notice that God wasn't concerned with him marrying a Israelite woman.
So Moses marrying the Midianite,
Yeah.
Zipporah. Yeah, and that's actually going to be a situation in the next couple of chapters, because there's a cultural clash between Moses's heritage and Zipporah's heritage, and so we're going to see this situation where they're going back to Egypt, and the angel of the Lord comes and tries to kill Moses, and so Zipporah circumcises Gershom and says, "You have become a bridegroom of blood to me." It's like, what is this story? So, so that'll be fun. But there is one of the key things in the promise to Abraham is that they will be a blessing to the nations. And so here we have this family that has the priest of Midian, Ruel, friend of God, or Jethro, either name. And so there's maybe some kind of peripheral understanding of El as God that is an echo to El, the name of God, which means God, El of the people of Israel. So there could be some heritage sharing happening, but there are still some significant differences. But Moses is on the run. He's abandoning his family. He's abandoning his adopted family, his nation, his heritage. He's leaving it all because Pharaoh wants to kill him. And so Moses probably wasn't even thinking about who to marry at this point. So, but in marrying her, he's also bringing in the nations into the nation of Israel eventually. So, yeah, there's a lot of little hints of what God is doing in his grander scheme of redemption to bless the nations through the descendants of Abraham. So, yeah. But good point, Chris. Any other questions or thoughts? No? All right. Well, y'all, you have a great one. And so next week we're going to be looking at, I had it open. Let me see here. It's just so we are able to say. So we're going to look at chapters 4 through 7:7, 4:1 through 7:7. So that will get us. We'll continue on with this interaction with the Lord at the burning bush, and Moses will get some signs from the Lord there. He'll head back to Egypt, have that bridegroom of blood conversation with Zipporah, which will be fun. So cool. Well, you guys have a great week. And if you're able to join us on Sunday at 11 a.m. in person, you can register at thecreeksidechurch.org/11 a.m. And it'll be great to see you all soon. Have a great week, and God bless.